So up until this point, when we've laid our user interface, we've used a linear layout container. But there are other layout containers that we have access to in Android, and we're going to look at those now. So I've just created a new project called Layout, and we're going to go into our main layout file, so that main.xml file. And again, every XML layout is going to have some type of layout container at its root. And if I go over to the code, now we've actually bumped up the font here for you so it's easier for you to see. But we can see at the default we have a linear layout and we have a text view inside of here. Now you'll notice this orientation property, which is vertical. And that means that as we add items to this layout, it's going to lay them out one after another in a vertical fashion. So let's see that. If I drag a button inside of here, we get this little indicator showing us where it's going to go if we drop it, which is right down below it. If I add a checkbox, again, it's going to go below the button. So laid out in a linear fashion. Now I can change the orientation to horizontal by clicking this. Now one of the things you'll notice is, where did those other two objects go? Well, it's because this hello world main, this text view, is set to fill up the parent container. And we can actually change that here by unchecking this fill width. And when we do this now, it's only taking up enough space to actually present its content. Now, how does that look in the actual properties? So let's open up the properties view here, and let's look at that hello world main, this text view. So you'll see the layout height and the layout width are actually now both set to wrap content. And what this means is it's only going to take up as much space as it needs to present itself. Now, one of the things that you'll notice when you start using, especially this graphical layout, is this properties panel does not always update itself. So a lot of times you have to right click and then say show in properties. So we'll select our item and say show in properties. And now you can see the layout width is match parent, which is going to take whatever the layout width is for the parent, which is of course to fill the entire area. So we'll uncheck that. So now you can see we have things laid out in a horizontal fashion. And again, I can switch that to vertical. So that's pretty simple because that's basically what happens with a linear layout. But we have other options. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select these and get rid of them. And I'll come over to the code and I'm just going to change this to a relative layout. A relative layout is considerably different. Now, one of the things we don't need is the orientation property because it doesn't exist on the relative layout container. So now relative layout container is exactly what it sounds like. We're going to lay things out relative to other items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a button. You can see I get these guides that say this is going to align to the left of the parent, the top, the right, the bottom. So we're just going to put it up here for now. So now, one of the things I wanted to point out is, let's say we wanted to center. So now as I bring other things into the layout, they're going to be positioned relative to one another. Now, let's say I wanted to actually center this button right in the middle of the layout. What I can do is to set the gravity property of my relative layout. And we can do it here by this little pull down menu. And let's say I choose center. This is now going to set the gravity in my relative layout to center. So things are going to be centered. And I can also set it to, all types of different positions. And let me just show you what that looks like in the properties view here. So we can see this gravity property. If we launch it this way, again, we can come and set any number of these to get the positioning that we want. I'm just going to remove that. Now when we add another item in here, let's say a radio button, if I hover over this button, we can see I get this grid and I'm able to position it anywhere that I want in relation to this button. So let's say I want to align it to the right of this button. And here we can see below, we see the properties that are going to be set to right of this button control, aligned to the top, aligned to the bottom. So when I drop it, we can now see it's positioned relative to this button. So that's essentially how a relative layout view works, which could be very powerful to use. Okay, so I'm going to go over back to my code and I'm going to change it to frame layout. And let's go back. And you can see frame layout, basically items overlap with one another. So let's say that I wanted to center these items inside of the layout. I can set the gravity property on these individual items. Now, all of these items, again, in a frame layout, they're going to overlap. the layout is not structured in a way to keep things separated. So it's not one you're going to use quite as often as the other types of layouts, but this can be useful if, for say, we wanted to have a bunch of items in the center and we wanted to turn off on and off their visibility based on a user action. So maybe a set of photos that are going to be here that we can programmatically toggle their visibility. But the main thing to remember about frame layout is that they overlap. It doesn't do any work for you to actually keep things separated. Okay, so the last one I want to show you is table layout. And this is one of the most useful. So I'll create that. And let me just get rid of the content that's in there. So with a table layout, it's basically, if you've used tables in Excel or in HTML, it's the same concept. So what I need to do to add things to my table layout is first I would need to put in a table row, which is a new row in the table. Okay, so now I can come in and let's say I want to add a button control. And now I want to create another row in my layout. So I'll add another table row here. And let's just add some other things. So a text view and then maybe another button. And we can see we're able to lay things out in a table-like fashion. We can have things automatically span multiple rows and columns. It does a really nice job of helping you with these layouts. And again, I can position things in a horizontal way in this row. Just keep adding table rows. And this can be very useful, especially if you're creating forms and you need, in this case, let's say we had a label and then we wanted to add an edit text view in here. It can be very useful. Let's say we wanted to have a form where the user filled out information and then had to submit it. This can be a very useful type of layout. But again, the main thing to remember about layouts is you want to try to keep them as flat as possible. There are situations where you have to embed certain layout containers inside of other ones, but generally you want to try to think about your layouts so that you can use as few layout containers as possible in your application.